Um, God, they really need to change that, don't they? It's so like intrusive recording. Cool. Hey everyone, it's really nice to be here. Yeah, I feel such an affinity with Toronto actually, because my grandparents moved from Scotland in 1951 to Toronto. My mum was born there, and they came back. So I apologise to Toronto, but it's like one of my favourite cities in the world. I feel a lovely affiliation. But I know there's lots of people joining from different places, and a few people have actually been on some of the courses I've done at the school. So apologies if some of it's repetition, but hopefully you're here for kind of the mutual kind of community feeling of a book club. So I'm going to be try and be like fairly swift because I actually have more questions for all of you. And I'm more interested to hear your discussion on the back of questions we might ask one another, if that makes sense. So I feel a little bit fraudulent to be here, given it's not a book and it's called a book club. But I do have intentions to write a book. But as Aaron said, I'm kind of currently moonlighting as a film director at the moment, or trying to be. So I'm a little busy, but some of the content I'm going to share today is some of the stories I'm going to delve into in the book. But yeah, it was a kind of full stack service design is a long article, I guess, that's hopefully a kind of helpful toolkit. And yeah, I guess I just wanted to introduce why I wrote it. I wrote full stack service design because I'd noticed a few things. I guess in my own agency at Snook and just in the industry in general, and coaching different designers, I'd find a lot of service designers were kind of quite frustrated with a lack of their work being implemented. And I also kind of noticed a bit of a trend in a lot of investment into service design being brought in-house, but service designers often being set up to fail because their work was often isolated into a kind of like separate team or department, or the sort of real work of what it takes to design really good services was sort of, I guess, misunderstood. And so our practice had often been categorized as, I guess, a kind of like utopian visioning of what a service should look like based on really good user research. And I just saw a lot of kind of failure going on, a lot of frustration. So I wanted to write something that could give people a kind of like a map, I guess, or a new vantage point on where and how design happens, kind of open our eyes to it, and kind of help people understand where you can make change happen in services for the better, to better meet user needs, to better meet organizational outcomes, to do better stuff for the planet as well, and understand where and how that can happen. And when I wrote it, I didn't necessarily think I was writing anything groundbreaking at all. I really don't think I wouldn't. Yeah, I don't think it is at all. But I thought what would be helpful, really, though, is a map, is a kind of like a consolidation of different ways you can have different vantage points of seeing where services can be changed. And I guess it was sort of a culmination of my experience. I've been really fortunate in my career to have been part of an agency, Snook, and to have worked on a whole plethora of an amazing number of projects, but also really that the conversations I've had with organizations through that work of seeing the problems that organizations have in delivering their services and kind of making them work for the users and their organizational outcomes. Sort of listening to like where those problems existed, like was it in a kind of like procurement level, was it the mission they had, was it how the kind of skills they had in the organization. And I feel really blessed to have had that kind of experience. And then sort of later on in my career, sort of sitting at a board level on some big charities like With You, small charities like Settle, so working in sort of health space. And I took up a CDO role, Chief Digital Officer role, at a really large technological organization called NEC, and just sitting in the boardroom and seeing how decisions get made about services there was just really fascinating to me. So I guess the full stack service design is sort of a culmination of a privilege I've really had to work at, I guess, like all different levels and different vantage points of organizations, from frontline right up to sort of board level. And I kind of thought to myself, like, what would I want if I was starting out again as a young designer coming into the industry? And definitely I felt like full stack service design would be something for myself I would have loved to have read, to just very quickly get an understanding, like a kind of I say in the article, a car mechanic can read a car very quickly and understand what's not working, what is working. Is it the engine? Is it the wheels? Is it the air pressure? Like whatever it is, a kind of version of that for service designers to sort of fast track that knowledge. And I guess this is a really pixelated image actually on purpose, I guess, because when I was studying product design when I first started out, we used to be given the task of exploding and visualizing objects and understanding the materials that they're made of. And I guess this is a very early Yale lock that I made in like 2002, like an exploded drawing and CAD version of an old Yale lock. But I guess what full stack was trying to do was sort of be the exploded version of a service, and give people an understanding of those different materials. And I think what I wanted to get across is that service design is really greenfield. If you do get the opportunity in your career to, you know, if you work in, let's take a kind of government or public sector example, if you get the opportunity to help shape policy, to meet user needs and to help people, you know, live thriving lives, and there is no bad technology underneath it that you have to build on top of, grab that opportunity with both hands, because greenfield is incredible if you get the chance to do it. But most service design is kind of brownfield most of the time, and it's working on top of a lot of stuff. And that stuff is the kind of different components that I list in the article. So having to build maybe on difficult to use technology or measurement criteria that an organization has set around a service already. It's quite difficult to work on top of that, but that's what we have to do often as service designers. And I think I sort of just wanted to reflect on this very briefly, that we always, a lot of coaching I did, people would always point to some kind of like up there bad guy that made like a really bad service or made really bad decisions. And I've always kind of thought that I don't think any one person wakes up in the morning and thinks, I'm going to make a really bad service for people and make it not work. And I often refer back to this example of the film, I, Daniel Blake, which is made by the incredible director, Ken Loach. He's a sort of director that makes amazing films based on real life, set in the UK, and kind of holds a mirror up to what it might look like. And it's the story of a man on the left here called Daniel Blake, who is a tradesman who has a heart condition, develops a heart condition, and has to give up work and sign on to benefits in the UK. And we see him in the film really struggle to interact with the system of getting benefits. And there's lots of reasons for why that is, but it's quite a harrowing story. And what you see in this film, I guess, if you kind of look at it from a full stack perspective, is there's no one person that's made just one bad decision that made it really difficult system for people to use. It's made of a culmination of lots of different decisions, from the policy, the technology, the measurement incentives that make that user experience happen for somebody. So it's not one person's fault, it's a kind of system of stuff. And I often think about this sort of idea as well, that, you know, by the time often designers in capital D design processes get a chance to, you know, product a service and either start designing it or improving one, there's so many decisions that have already been made before we even get to the point of designing, that are, you know, sometimes helpful constraints, but a lot of the time difficult constraints or brownfield sort of materials that we need to work on top of. And lots of decisions that have been made that impact service outcomes and the user experience that we have. And these decisions are often made, you know, away from us making decisions at a design level in kind of workshops, at our screens, or whatever it is, the kind of spaces that we're designing in. They're made in boardrooms, they're made at the front line, they're made in how we design policy, they're made in how we procure technology. All of these decisions impact our services and user experience. And if you haven't watched I, Daniel Blake before, like, please go and watch it, because it's a really great one. Ken Loach is my favorite director. It's a really great film, but it also kind of shows him struggling to interact with some of the gov.uk design system on a screen to collect job seekers allowance. And it's a pretty harrowing bit of watch where he tries to drag the mouse down the screen and it sort of makes these noises because the boxes don't work. And I actually went to see that film with some of the people who worked on that design, and I can tell you they're some of like the best, most experienced, talented designers I've met in the business. That touch point of that service is extremely accessible. The content design is amazing. The flow of it is brilliant. But all of the decisions that led to the constraints had to design that touch point within mean that it's really difficult to get the outcome for the user. And that's why I like to sort of start thinking about full stack service design. And this is one of, I just put this in, it's a really bad diagram, but it is how I used to sort of go around in a very early sense before I wrote the article, describing full stack service design, this kind of idea that as an industry and profession, we've been really focused on the sort of top of the iceberg part of this, which is thinking about user journeys, thinking about user experience, thinking about making touch points work and the flows work and getting users to outcomes. And all of that work is really needed and really vital. but it can't sit in isolation to the stuff we often don't get to work on or can't see. And I'm not saying that we don't work on that stuff, because many service design projects do work on a sort of full stack level. But I guess as a whole in industry, a lot of work goes into the kind of top bit of the iceberg. So I wanted to kind of write full stack service design as a way to be a kind of map around that iceberg and join it up. So probably most of you read it, so I'm going to just kind of whiz through this at speed, and then I'm more interested really in the kind of conversation around this. But don't need to kind of wax lyrical about services. But one of the things in writing the article that, and in turn, when I eventually get to write the book, I think was really key for me, was to start thinking about the core questions I ask of any of these layers, so I can think about how they're kind of the decisions that have been made relate to the impact it might have on the end service or the end user experience. And these are some of the simplest but most what's the right word, revealing questions that I will ask people who are, I guess, leaders of services or have some form of decision-making prowess around a service. And most of the time, boards, executive teams can't clearly answer what the kind of outcomes of services are, you know, what the different user needs are, who the users actually are, what are their services. So at a service level, before I even get into the sort of, I guess, service design and user experience design, I'm often working at quite a high level to just understand what is it that we're actually delivering, and making sure we have a really good idea of what the service is in regards to what it's trying to help the organization do and what it's trying to help users do. And I think one of the reasons that we find making services really good and work for people so hard is that they're really, really invisible. And that's really hard to work at a sort of full stack level and help people understand how the decisions that they make, again, in procurement, how we measure stuff, the skills that we have in an organization. If we can't see the service in the first place and really be clear about what it does, it's quite difficult to attach that to the decisions being made sort of below the surface of the water. So I'm kind of really big into kind of just making sure we're really clear about actually what a service is trying to do and what its outcome is. So I'm not going to wax lyrical about this. I think most of us in the room, and I know a few people are quite experienced in service design, but just really trying to be clear about what the outcome is, who's involved in helping a user get to the outcome, and trying to kind of get into the kind of detail of how we get people towards that outcome. So really being clear about whether we as an organization you know, own the whole set of steps and stages of getting someone to an overall outcome and the thing that they're trying to do, or whether we own a part of it. So at a kind of service level, I'm sort of really within full stack just trying to get some clarity actually on what the service actually is. And then when it comes to business processes, I'm sort of fascinated by these things. I'm sure many of us have probably had to navigate really complex language when we're using services, but business processes can become very visible to users. So I've always used this little project as a lovely example of where a frontline member of staff has spent some time trying to debunk some of that complexity of a business process that's in place for them to help their users, like Daniel Blake, actually get benefits. What I'm about to show you is made by a man who's called John in the purple shirt in the back, and this was part of a program called Systems Changers that I helped run in the UK, which took a group of frontline staff, as you see here, and taught them a bit about kind of systems design, systems change, and service design, and asked them to kind of make changes in the systems that they operate in. And John is someone that kind of supports people at the front line who have multiple and complex needs. And his sort of design project within the program was to actually try and debunk some of the business processes around claiming different forms of benefits. And I just love this work because it's really kind of unpacking how complicated it is, all the different language there that exists in helping somebody to actually get to an outcome of getting a benefit from a frontline staff point of view. So he used some different mapping tools to try and explain what that looks like, and actually created his own little paper leaflets that he made in Microsoft Word, turning the paper horizontal and folding them. It's a brilliant bit of work because he's not really a designer, but really thinking about how he makes those business processes easier for people. So I'm sort of interested even at that level when we design services, within this kind of service layer and full stack, looking at the kind of business processes we have in place and kind of work like this. I would be careful of time, so I'll just kind of whiz through these, but you've kind of seen this all in the article. I sort of break it down into 5 different layers, one being the service, the second being infrastructure, thinking about the kind of systems and technology and sort of data components that exist within that layer, and thinking kind of about, you know, the systems and technology that underlie our services. You know, they really shape what those services actually look like and how they operate, but they also contribute to, you know, huge points of failure and fragility in services as well, and our ability to kind of change them at speed when we need to. And, you know, there's loads of examples that I'm hoping to kind of put into the book, but one of my, it's not like a favorite example because it's not a good, it's not a lovely example, but there was a case in the UK where an Excel spreadsheet was blamed for 16,000 missing coronavirus cases at one of our big health authorities. And it was a spreadsheet that basically, like, I think the story goes like it ran out of cells basically to kind of keep replicating itself for documenting information. And that whole part of that service went down because of the underlying technology. So when we're designing services, I'm always really interested in us kind of prodding around and kind of being almost archaeological about what our service is actually operating on, and, you know, making changes here, making sure the stuff is safe and secure and works correctly. And another example that I just came across recently, but I just wanted to share today that I really loved was when one of the new bosses came into, I think it would just get my notes up, Formula One. They found, let me just get the number, they found that the team that was managing the different car parts and doing all of the repairs had an Excel spreadsheet with more than, I think it was 77,000 lines of component parts hidden across their different garages, making it very difficult for them to kind of quickly make repairs, make sure they had the right stock in place for all the races. And, you know, when you think about essentially like an organization running on something so fragile and so detailed, it doesn't really kind of make sense. So I'm interested in like how we as service designers can go kind of beneath the surface and say, actually, is there something we could solve here at a sort of systems or data level? So I'm interested in that sort of systems and data level when it comes to kind of technology. I'm just going to skip on so I make sure I've got enough time. And then, yeah, at the organizational level, thinking this layer still feels quite big. I'm not sure if I'll change it if I write a book on full stack, but the way in which we organize ourselves to make decisions, I think, has a massive impact on our services. And this covers things like governance, so when and how we meet to make decisions. This is, again, another bit of a silly example, but there was a case when Ryanair basically had to like cancel a bazillion flights for customers, and it was because they didn't have the right process for actually allocating holiday for their pilots, and that crashed the service, right? So that is another kind of example of where a kind of governance level or internalized business process level, if we've not got that right, it can kind of crash and stop the service from working. So we can be working at this level, making sure that kind of continuity of how we take holidays is right. So I see this as all kind of part of service design. You know, I'm not going to go into this every single one today, but how we finance services is a particular bugbear of mine, that we often, you know, develop what we call capital expenditure to start doing the kind of research and development of services, but we very rarely make sure that there's operational expenditure to kind of continuously improve that service after it's been kind of designed or even built. So, you know, the way in which we finance our services at an organizational layer and make a decision on that has a massive impact on the service itself, its ability to kind of keep improving. What we procure in, if we don't have good contracts in place with our suppliers, if we don't think about making sure there's continuous improvement in place, again, that can affect the service in the long term. And yeah, how we're structured, how we make decisions, who has power and authority, you know, all of these things kind of differently affect things. One of the last, I guess, examples that I'll share that I really like as an example is Bertzorg, which is a Dutch healthcare organization that was set up by someone called, I think it was Jock de Blos, who was originally someone who provided care himself in the Netherlands. And quite a few years ago now, the sector was just at an all-time low, like patient sort of scores on service performance amongst, you know, a whole bunch of different organizations were really low. Recovery times of coming out of hospital were low. And so Joss decided to sort of take his frontline experience and set up an organization which really focused on, I guess, the design of the service internally first. And I think it really brings, for me, that full stack to life. So what Joss did was give the frontline staff, who are nurses and different care workers, more training and more decision-making power to allow them to take decisions at the front line rather than waiting for a doctor to sign off different decisions they need to make. So they made that happen by giving them more training, but also putting in place the ability to speak to doctors to kind of sign off some of their decisions. And the kind of care that they provide it's multifold. You know, they do things like providing different forms of medicine that's been approved. They'll do help people have showers, they'll help people return from hospital, they'll make food, they'll do a whole bunch of stuff. But sometimes medical decisions need to be made. So by actually increasing the kind of skills within the frontline workforce, they were able to administer stuff much more quickly and effectively to patients. They also massively decentralized their organization and put more of their finance investment into more staff at the front line and kind of shrunk the core. And that is a kind of service design, without thinking about the sort of just a user experience level, led to them becoming the kind of highest rated care organization in recent years in the Netherlands, the models being kind of replicated across the world. And I think, I don't have my notes to hand, but I think it decreased the amount of support people need by 3 whole months by kind of speeding up their recovery pathways out of hospital. So a whole bunch of different well-measured and evidenced improvements to that. So that was looking at the kind of skills side of a service. So again, full stack's just really here to try and help people to, navigate how to think about this stuff. And as a kind of counter to this, as I mentioned right at the start, one of my other roles is working as a board member at Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park in Scotland, which is, I love doing that job. And one of the things that we're trying to do at the moment is redesign how people get around the park. Currently 92%, I think, being recorded. So I want to get my facts right. 92% of people travel to the national park by car, and that causes a huge amount of emissions, and we're trying to go on a pathway towards net zero. So one of our biggest emitters is how people travel around the park. So in trying to reduce this, we're trying to design a sustainable kind of transport system, and that means trialing different things like bringing in shuttle buses. And it's kind of a really easy solution in a sense in our heads, or so we thought it was, but for the last 3 years, we failed to actually put that service in place because of a lack of availability of drivers in the system. In fact, I think the stat that was going around was that the youngest driver that we could get kind of locally, who was all approved to be able to drive one of the buses, was 62 years old. So it's, again, looking at the kind of availability of skills to be able to actually run a service is what we needed to really consider there, and really look at how the lead-in times to procuring the service for the summer and things like this. So again, we're working really hard, less at the user experience level for stuff like this, but actually kind of much more deeply in the stack. You'll be pleased to know we eventually found, not these people, this is our youth committee and our CEO, but we did find, we did eventually get a shuttle bus, which is actually starting this year, but it took us 3 years of working through the gnarly problems actually of procurement and of making sure there were skills available in the sector and the marketplace to be able to put the provision in for this new service. So I'm just showing some of these things as little examples that I know are not in the blog, but lots of stuff that I'm intending to sort of take into book to kind of provide examples around the questions we need to ask when we are trying to make services happen. I guess I'll finish with 1 or 2 last very quick ones. One of the other layers of the stack is about intent. And I sort of love this bit because I think it really, intent sort of sets the direction of what it is we're designing, whether it's, how we have a policy to design for. Obviously, that's kind of almost the brief of a service. Maybe the values and ethics that exist within an organization, which are either written down or just exist in the sort of dark matter of a kind of cultural element of an organization. But business models to me are the things that have the strongest hold on impacting how we design services. And that won't be news to any of you, but I think it's something that we need to lean into when we're designing services and creating space to look at if we can innovate parts of services as well through a sort of business model lens. And, I always use this example, and apologies if there's anyone who's been on my course, because I know I've used this example with you, so you'll be really familiar with it. But Blockbuster, if you remember, prior to kind of Netflix and lots of on-demand television, used to exist on the high street. You would go and get video cassettes, if you can remember those, and games from the high street. And they would charge you if you brought them back late. And Blockbuster's percentage of revenue from late fees annually, it was 16% at the time. So they're not going to innovate how they design or deliver that service based on the fact that they make lots of money from a certain element of the business. And I think one of the things I'll sort of kind of finish with, I've probably got too much to say, and we'll cover it in the questions. I want to leave time for sort of questions and stuff, but is, I kind of, just like you saw that Yale lock, that sort of exploded diagram of a product, I sort of take that same thinking all the time it's really annoying to be curious about the world in that way all the time. It's exhausting, but I look at every service and I'm like, what makes it? What is the stack of this thing? And I think that's what I hope if and when I get to write a book at some point, if someone will have it, I really want people to get excited and curious about this. So, if you're walking around the world, have a look at services and think, how does that thing exist? What's the business model behind it? Wonder what kind of skills you need to have in place to make this happen. And I was just reading about this the other day, but I didn't know this, but Costco, right? Like they make, I don't know, is it more money? I'm just checking my notes. 80%. I got this off the internet, so if I'm wrong and I'm being recorded, I do apologize, but this is on the internet, so I'm taking it as truth. 80% of Costco's profit comes from the $100 fee you pay just to walk in the door. Like, it's nuts, right? Like, you'd think it'd be from the sort of like the profit they make on what they sell, but it's actually from the membership, which is an incredible business model. It's the same as like if you look at McDonald's, like hamburger flipping is just a cover up for them being a real estate business. So I get really curious about this stuff because this shapes the brief for our service design work. This shapes the constraints that we have in place. So yeah, really super interested about this stuff. And I guess what I'm really interested in with full stack is moving from seeing things as constraints to things that can be designed and influenced, and recognizing that everybody is designing, sometimes not consciously, but sometimes our work as service designers might be about leaning into the stack, going and working with folks that work in procurement and saying, can we change the way that we procure this partnering because it's actually really impacting our service in this way? Or we need a bit more skill development in this marketplace to really make sure that we can deliver this service. So I'll probably, I think I'll pause there, but just kind of finish with like, I've kind of got a bit of a book in me for this. So I'm kind of curious to hear, like, would it be interesting as a book? I've got some ideas for like tools that could help people actually use the framework a bit more, but I'm really much more curious to find out from you, like, what did you take from reading it, except for a couple of spelling mistakes, because I have noticed them. Where have you applied it and how? Some people have been in touch and said, oh, I used this, I would love to know. And would it be helpful if it was a book? And as Aaron said, we've only got sort of 25 minutes at the end here. So I want to hear from you, and I'm happy to answer questions. But if you've got any other ideas and stuff, like, that's my email address. You can drop me a line or tweet me or get me on LinkedIn. But it's probably a book because I talked for 20 minutes already. So I'll stop there. Like,